small till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't. I'm building up a wall till it breaks. She hated when I call and it's late. I don't wanna keep you waiting. I hope I never keep you waiting. She think I know it all, but I don't.
Welcome to episode 2 of season 4 of the mixtape with Scott. I'm the host, Scott Cunningham, a professor at Baylor University in the economics department. This is a podcast devoted to the personal stories of living economists and using those stories or hoping that those stories will over time form a oral history of the profession, last 50 years anyway. This week's guest is someone that many of you know really well, probably through many different experiences. This is Greg Mankiw, the Robert Barron Professor of Economics at Harvard. Many of you know him for his work in macroeconomics, but even more of you, probably this is true, know of him because of his extremely popular book, Principles of Economics, Principles of Microeconomics, Principles of Macroeconomics, as well as his intermediate level textbook, Macroeconomics. These books have collectively sold about 5 million copies in the United States, or at least in the English-speaking parts of the world, and then probably another 5 million outside in translations. As I tell him in the thing, it's probably the case that not only have a lot of us learned economics from Greg Mankiw, but a lot of us also, and I think this is probably true, learned about teaching economics from Greg Mankiw. It's a book that I think many of us were given as graduate students to teach undergraduates, or it was the book we selected when we got our first jobs and taught that big micro or that big macro class. And so it was really wonderful to get to talk to him, to get to hear his story. I don't want to spoil anything, but this was a lot of fun. And I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. If you like it, share it with your students. This might be a fun one to share with your students, but I think it's fun even just listening to yourself. Thanks a lot. All right, this is such an honor. I think we've met maybe one time, but I probably remember it better than you do. This is Dr. Greg Mankiw from Harvard University. Greg, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
It's nice to be with you, Scott.
For the sake of the listener, I already said your name, but could you tell us the long title and who pays your paycheck?
Oh, yeah. I am the Robert M. Barron Professor of Economics at Harvard University.
Okay, great. Not Robert Barrow, Robert Barron.
No, Barron, B-E-R-E.
That would be awkward to have your colleagues care, right? Okay, this is an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you've gone on in your life that, looking back, you still think about from time to time, whether it was a long time ago, recent, whether it was a good vacation or a bad one?
Vacation. I really like the beach. And as we're recording this, I'm actually sitting in my Nantucket home. We've been coming to Nantucket for about 30 years, originally as renters, and then about 10 years ago, we built a house. And so now I come here every summer. People don't know this, but the 3 best reasons for being a professor are June, July, and August.
Right.
I take full advantage of that now that they have this beach house that I work here. It's not pure vacation, but I just really like being at the beach because it's so relaxing.
What's Nantucket like? I've never been to Nantucket. I've only been to like southern beaches.
It's a small island about 30 miles off the coast of Cape Cod, and it really feels like an island. The year-round population is only something like 10 or 15,000. Summer it goes up to 50 or 60,000, but it's still kind of small, and you can basically drive in 20 minutes from one end of the island to the other.
Mm.
And so you get to, it's a really nice community, great restaurants, nice beaches. At some point, climate change will probably take it over and it'll return to the sea, but probably not in my lifetime.
Right, right. So you've kind of had grown up with you and your family kind of grew up with or had like the summer community,
Yes,
the
exactly. I grew up in
ones
New
that like the
Jersey.
families that are always there.
Yes, I grew up in New Jersey, and my parents had a house on Long Beach Island, which is
Oh,
an island just north of Atlantic City. And that's where we spent time growing up. And then my personal family here with my wife and kids, we started, well, actually, my wife and I started going to Martha's Vineyard, which is another island off the coast of Cape Cod.
oh,
We stayed at this wonderful little inn called the Charlotte Inn. It's one of these, old and cute inns with lots of antiques and stuff. But
yeah.
they don't let you bring small children. So when our first child was born, my daughter, uh, she basically induced us to start looking around for someplace else to go. And we said, "Oh, let's try the other island. Let's try Nantucket," which we had never been to, or I had never been to. I think my wife had. But so
Huh.
we switched to Nantucket, and we decided we liked it a little better. It's a little more smaller. It's a little more like an island, and we kind of like that island feel.
Oh, yeah. That sounds so nice. So you grew up in New Jersey. Where did you say you grew up?
Yeah,
Which
New
part of New
Jersey.
Jersey?
I was actually born in Trenton.
Yeah.
And then, like, when I was a baby, my parents moved to Cranford, New Jersey,
Huh.
which is Union County, and that's where I grew up.
What'd your mom and dad do for a living?
My father, neither of my parents went to college. Uh,
Uh-huh.
my father started off his career as a draftsman for Western Electric, which was part of the AT&T complex. Then I don't think it
Oh,
exists that name now. Um, and then he started taking night classes offered by the company, and was basically trained as an electrical engineer. So he then
oh,
basically moved from draftsman to electrical engineer even without a college degree. Um, and his specialty was batteries. I remember as a kid thinking, what a boring thing, spending all your life thinking about batteries. Now I know how important batteries are to the future of the energy system. But at the time, it
right.
seemed like incredibly boring. My father spent all his days thinking about batteries. Um,
Wow.
and my mother had been a hairdresser before I was born. She then stopped working when I was born, and then later went back to work as a teacher. Actually, she was actually teaching at a vocational school, so she was teaching hairdressing,
Oh.
cosmetology they call it, at a public vocational school.
Oh, wow. So were you an only child or did you have some
I have
siblings?
an older sister who's 9 years older than I am,
Oh, wow. The 9 years older. That's what I have too.
so it feels
So
like two only children in
yeah,
sequence.
it's like the two only children thing. Yeah, yeah. So what kind of games did you like playing when you were like fourth or fifth grade?
Oh, fourth or fifth grade. Oh, I don't know. I liked board games. I remember playing things like Monopoly and Risk,
Oh yeah.
stuff like that. Yes. And then as I got older, I fell in love with chess. Uh,
Mm.
and the chess club was quite active in my high school. And so I
Oh,
started playing, I basically played tournament chess. I was not great, but I was sort of, medium for a tournament player. So
when did you do that? That was in high school?
high school, this is in high school. I
Oh,
used to spend weekends going to chess tournaments.
oh,
And I
interesting.
was a member of the chess club. Eventually became president of the chess club in high school, and then would spend the weekends going to chess tournaments.
Oh, wow. Wow. Uh, oh, that's neat. You still play?
Occasionally, I play with my older son.
Yeah.
My skills have deteriorated substantially over the past 50 years.
Yeah.
But my older son will play with me, and he's the only one in my family that does it. I haven't gone to a tournament in half a century, so
Huh.
my knowledge of the openings is really has fallen off. He said a lot of this, some of it is memorization and
Yeah.
knowing different patterns. And I would study the chess books. I still have my chess books at home, so and I think, okay, maybe in retirement I'll start playing chess again.
Huh.
But
Hey,
to be honest, it's not a great hobby for somebody who spends all their day with books anyway. Right? You kind of
uh,
need some sort of hobby that involves a little more physical activity. So as for an academic, it's probably a terrible hobby.
uh-huh.
But I really did enjoy it.
Wasn't Bobby Fischer sort of around where you
Exactly,
were?
exactly.
Yeah.
So the Fischer Spassky match was a big deal. It turned out I
Mm,
never watched the Fischer Spassky match because it happened during the summer. We were at our beach house, and our beach house didn't have a television, and so
mm,
I I, I never watched any of this the Fischer Spassky match, but it did sort of revive interest in chess. So the chess club in my high school, I think, was more lively because of that than otherwise would have been. I
mm.
remember when I was in ninth grade, there was this older student who eventually left high school early to go to MIT, a very smart guy who happened to have a free period with me. And he was the best chess player in the high school. And he was, for some reason, enjoyed playing me and beating me because we got together that free period we had in common, and he beat me every single game. I don't think I ever won a game against him, but I got better because of that. And
Yeah.
I learned a lot, watching him and playing with him. And so by the time I graduated from high school, I was the best chess player at the high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was
Because
only the willingness to lose repeatedly.
well, so what kind of classes did you like in high school?
Well, I was mainly a math science guy, and so
Ah.
that was the classes I liked. And so it's certainly what I was best at. And so when I came to college, I was thinking I'd be a math major or maybe a physics major. I think that my first declared major was math.
Mm,
Um, One thing I learned when I was a small high school. It was a small independent school called the Pingree School in New Jersey. My graduating class was 84, I think. So a
mm,
small class. And I went from Pingree to Princeton, and my view of being good at math completely changed because being the best math student in your small graduating class of 84 made you think like you were good in math. Then you go to Princeton, where all these people are fantastic mathematicians. Even the
right.
students are like going to national math Olympiads, winning Putnam Awards, and doing
Yeah.
all this amazing stuff. And then you realize, okay, I'm better than average at math, but I'm not great at math.
Hmm.
So that was one of the things that sort of nudged me to start thinking about different occupations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've been at MIT and Princeton and Harvard, so, I can imagine that there's a lot of things about it that would be kind of normalized. But if your parents never went to college until you're sort of going for the first time and then you go to Princeton, it must have been really special to open that letter of acceptance.
Oh, it
Was it?
was. No, it
Yeah.
was. No,
Oh.
the whole college experience was really very important for me because it really opened doors uh, in ways I hadn't. Well, my parents didn't have the opportunity to go through.
Mm,
If I go back in time a little bit, I'm in the second grade, um, and the teacher calls in my mother for a conference, and the teacher explains that they had given the class some sort of standardized aptitude test. And the
mhm.
teacher said, "Greg did well. We were very surprised." And I was very talkative at home, but I was kind of shy in class, and I was sort of sitting in the back, and I was just trying to make myself not noticed, just trying to get through the day. And so the teacher didn't think I had much potential until this test. And so
Mm,
after this test, the teacher started giving me extra work that the rest of the class didn't have.
mm,
So that continued for the next couple of years. And my mother was never very impressed by the kind of extra work they were doing. It was like, building dioramas and stuff like that, the kind of busy work that you give to second graders. So she actually didn't think it was very intellectually stimulating. So she
mm.
started looking around and asking, what's the best school in this area in New Jersey, central New Jersey. And she found the Pingree School, which is sort of an independent day school, college prep kind of school.
Yeah.
And we applied to that. And it's the only school we applied to. And I got in, and I started that in the fourth grade. That
Mm,
school, it's a relatively small school, was really a very important school for my intellectual development, making me think about college. Because most of the kids there were sons and daughters of, um, of doctors and lawyers, and so it was an educated community.
mhm.
So it was very different from the community that I grew up in. Now, interestingly, the school's expensive is still today. It was then probably more expensive today, but it was even expensive then. It was a stretch for my parents to pay for
Yeah.
this. That's when my mother went back to work. She went back to work in order to pay for my school
Huh.
because they wanted me to go to this independent school, which was expensive, and they couldn't have afforded it otherwise. So she got this job as a vocational school teacher. She didn't have teacher certification. She'd been a hairdresser, but to teach in the public schools, you didn't need a college degree, but you didn't need teacher certification. So she
Mm.
went back to college at night, start getting teacher certification so she could continue teaching in this public vocational school.
Wow.
So she really made quite a big sacrifice, both in terms of working that she was going to work and then having to go back to school at night in order to keep the job.
Huh. So your parents, they sound extremely intelligent. Like they had a lot of, even though they didn't, there must be a story there. They don't
Yeah,
go
I
to
think
college.
I think they had a lot of potential that
Mm.
wasn't realized, given that they came from their parents were immigrants from Ukraine. My
Uh-huh.
grandparents all immigrated from Ukraine around 1910. Some of them thinking they'd go back, but the combination of World War I and the Russian Revolution made a return
Mm.
um, less desirable.
Yeah.
They came as teenagers, not knowing each other. And they met here in Ukrainian communities and sort of settled in
Oh.
Trenton and Bayonne, New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow. So you go to Princeton and you sort of update your priors pretty quickly that you somehow are good at math, enjoy math, but you don't want to major in math.
Exactly. So I started off as a math major, but switched to economics, and that was also very fortuitous. I During my freshman year there, I was dating a young woman who was taking an economics course, and she would come back and tell me what she was studying in her economics course. This
Hmm.
is my introductory to microeconomics, taught by Harvey Rosen, who
It
is
was? Oh, wow.
who's well known to be a very good teacher. I mean, really a fantastic teacher.
Uh-huh.
And so I got interested in it. I started reading her book, which is actually Lipsy and Steiner's old textbook. I don't think it's print anymore. But and I said, this is really interesting. This idea that you could apply basically relatively straightforward math in order
Yeah.
to understand the world of human beings. That was eye-opening to me, and that was to me that was absolutely fascinating. And so
Mm.
I started taking economics the second semester freshman year, again from
Mm.
Harvey Rosen.
Mm.
And so Harvey was, I love Principles of Micro. I just thought he was fantastic. Uh, years later, he would actually adopt my textbook, which was one of the greatest compliments I ever got. Had my old teacher adopting the textbook I then wrote, decades later. Um,
Wow.
but anyway, during that semester, I got to know Harvey just a little bit, and having a little bit of chutzpah, I went into his office as a freshman and asked for if he wanted to hire me as a research assistant. Now, I didn't realize it's kind of rare to hire a freshman as a research assistant. Because I obviously no economics. I'd only taken principles of micro and principles of macro. That's the only economics I'd ever taken. But
Yeah.
fortunately, in high school, I had learned a little bit of computer programming, Fortran,
Oh,
and he
okay.
needed somebody to do some Fortran programming for him. So he hired me to work for him that summer.
Oh,
And that,
wow.
and that was my first sort of job in economics, was basically staying on the on the Princeton campus, staying on the Princeton campus and working for Harvey the summer of
Yeah.
1977.
IBM mainframe 370 kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Punch cards.
Punch cards.
Yes.
Oh, wow. How were you doing that? That was in high school?
Well, yeah, I always looked for things to do in the weekends, and so I took a um, course in programming at Newark, what was then called Newark College of Engineering. I think it's now New Jersey Institute of Technology.
Oh,
But anyways, there's a small technical institute not far from my house, and so I just took a Saturday course and sort of taught myself. But
oh,
I mean, it wasn't I didn't teach myself as a teacher, of course, but it was outside of the normal school setting. It wasn't part of the high school setting that I was in.
everything you've said, it's like your father is kind of a blue collar scientist, or, in a lot of ways, the way you've described him
Yes.
is, and you've got this natural mathematical aptitude and you're even, teaching yourself to program. Was there anything looking back that would have said, "Oh, I actually love this idea of studying society"?
Well, my father, he was a engineer. he was actually involved in local politics. So I mean,
Oh,
so he was, I mean, at a very, very low level, like local town councilman, or I forget what the title was, but it's really just the local level. And so, he was very interested in political issues. We would talk about them over dinner. He'd have me going door to door distributing flyers for whatever candidate he was supporting. Um, so so there was an interest in those issues.
you felt that too? You were also interested in it?
Yeah, because I think yes, but I mean, to me, it didn't strike me something I'd ever want to study because it seemed too squishy. I mean, I liked
Mm.
things that had a right answer and a wrong answer.
Yeah.
And uh, the idea of going to something that would just be like just talking and wouldn't be analytic in any way, that
Mm.
did not appeal to me. What Harvey Rosen's course told me was that you can do both. You can be analytic and you can talk about societal issues.
Mm.
And I think that was really eye-opening.
Mm. Mm. Is there a point at Princeton where you sort of go, I absolutely want to be an economist?
Well, there was two people at Princeton that were very influential to me. One was Harvey, as we talked about. The other was Alan Blinder. I took a graduate course from Alan, and he advised my senior thesis. And he was very much of a role model for
Mm.
me, and still is. I mean, I still have just tremendous respect for both Harvey and Alan. Um, but even if, and so I definitely started thinking about graduate school in economics, and I had several other friends who were thinking about it too. So it didn't seem like a weird thing to do. I think today at Harvard, you don't see that many undergraduates going off to grad school, but I had several close friends who were all thinking about grad school in economics. One of them was David Romer.
He was at
Uh,
Princeton with you?
he was my class at Princeton. David.
Oh, okay.
He was actually valedictorian in my class at Princeton.
Oh, so y'all
Uh,
were good friends.
we were good friends. Yes, he was
You
actually
met in,
later, a few years later, he was best man at my wedding, and I was best man at his wedding.
oh, wow.
The
Wait,
other
so you met in a class at Princeton?
Probably, I can't remember exactly where we met. It's probably in a class. I mean, we
Huh.
were in the same year. I mean, it's a big class. It's the 1600 or so. I guess back then it was only 1100. But anyway, there's over 1,000 people
Yeah.
um, in the class. But I must have met him in a class. I can't imagine where else I would have met him. But
Yeah.
the other two people who I knew were thinking about grad school in economics were Jim Rauch, who's a international economist at San Diego now, and
Uh-huh.
Danny Quah, who's now I think in Singapore, but he came to got his PhD at Harvard when I got mine at MIT. So,
Huh.
there were several of us who were thinking about grad school in economics.
Mm.
Having said that, I don't think I was 100% committed to it at that point because I was
Hmm.
still kind of feeling my way, trying to figure out what I was good at. So when I applied to grad school in economics from Princeton, I also applied to law school.
Hmm.
And I got into a variety of places and decided to sort of put together a law and economics kind of program to do both. So actually, So when I graduated Princeton in 1980, I had to basically accepted a position both at Harvard Law School and in MIT PhD program. And so I
Hmm.
spent 1 year at MIT, 1 year at Harvard Law School, um, trying to figure out really what I wanted to do. And I didn't end up finishing the law degree, but it was sort of my way to sort of explore what my niche in the world was, what was my comparative advantage.
Hmm. What did you realize when you were in the law school that made
Well,
you say, I'm not going to do it?
well, what happened? Well, I'll give you the whole chronology. I did 1 year at MIT, uh, 1 year at Harvard Law School. I then went down and worked at the Council of Economic Advisors on the staff for a year. Marty Feldstein had just been appointed chairman of the council by Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
He brought down his student to be on the senior staff, Larry Summers. And Larry
Mm.
Summers, who I'd taken a course from at MIT, brought me to be his assistant. So I basically worked as Larry Summers' assistant for that year. That was the
Okay.
third year out of college. The fourth year, I went back to MIT and finished my PhD.
Yeah, that just seems bizarre.
It is. And then I went back to law school, and I was in the middle of my second year of law school. Now, my advisor at MIT was Stan Fisher, was saying, "Why are you finishing this law degree? This seems like kind of a waste of time." But I was kind of still trying to figure out my own niche in the world. But by the middle of second year of law school, I said, I'm not really enjoying this as much.
Mm.
I'm an okay law student. I'm probably middle of the class somewhere at Harvard Law School, but I was doing pretty well in this economic stuff. My dissertation was getting published, and it looked like this academic economics was going to work out for me. And
Yeah.
so at that point, I kind of realized my comparative advantage was economics rather than law. Now, I
Mm.
don't know if you happen to know the geography of Harvard, but the law school shares a parking lot with the economics department. So it's literally with one building's right across the parking lot from the other. And so
Mm.
when I basically left the law school, I basically left the law school where I was a student paying Harvard money. And I joined the economics department across the parking lot where I was an assistant professor and Harvard was paying me money. And that
Mm.
seemed like definitely a good transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, that's crazy. So I want to back up a little bit. First, um, to me and anyway, MIT's like the kind of one of these like the center of gravity of the history of the profession in a lot of ways. It's just this really special, important place. But I'm curious, when you got there, did you I mean, since you're friends with Paul Romer and others, it seems like you probably went in fairly literate about the importance of the school. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was David Romer, by the way, not Paul Romer.
Oh, it was David Romer.
David
Oh,
Romer.
oh, I
David
missed that.
Romer. Yeah, it was David Romer. Um, yeah, no, when I was at Princeton, I chatted with Harvey Rosen and Alan Blinder and several other people, and they all agreed that MIT was the best place for grad school at that point. I
Mm,
think after a few years, Harvard got better, and I think we started sort of competing head on head. But at that moment in history, in 1980, MIT was the place to go.
mm,
I had taken a bunch of grad courses at Princeton, so I kind of knew what grad school was like.
yeah.
Um, so it wasn't really nothing about the culture shocked me. One of the people I went there for was Stan Fisher because I'd seen him talk and I thought he was amazing, and he
Mm,
was amazing. He was just an amazing advisor, an amazing person.
mm,
And there was a lot of interest at that point in macro. This was 1980, so think of the high inflation and Paul Volcker and everything going
yeah.
on in the economy. There's a lot of interest in macroeconomics, and so there are quite a few people in my class at MIT who ended up becoming macroeconomists. Just I'm going to forget
Hmm.
some, but it was, Michael Woodford was in my class, Matthew Shapiro, Steve Zeldis, Robert Barsky, Larry Ball. That's really
Hmm.
quite a few, really
Yeah.
people who've gone on to fantastic careers as
Yeah.
economists.
Yeah. Is there a connection? I saw in Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a really great Greg Mankiw uh, page, and I saw that you wrote this massive thesis at Princeton, but I don't remember the title. Does that at all anticipate what you end up doing? Because
It,
it was
it, do-
huge. It's
it,
like
it does.
70 pages long.
Yes. Um, it does anticipate what I was doing. I wrote it with Alan Blinder as the advisor, and it actually won the best thesis prize for that year, which
Mm,
is the undergraduate prize. And then Alan and I took part of it and turned it into a paper that got published in the Journal of Monetary Economics. That was one of my first publications.
oh,
I don't think it was
wow.
one of my I don't think it was one of my more important publications, but it was one of my first. But it did, but part of it started me thinking about questions that would later go on to lead to publications that I think were more important. In particular, I was particularly concerned with the cyclical behavior of the real wage. I
Mm,
remember listening to one of Alan's lectures that he was telling the standard Keynesian story, which is all based on a sticky nominal wage. And he was saying, oh, so we have sticky nominal wage, so therefore there's increase in aggregate demand. Prices start rising, real wages start falling. That encourages people to hire more. That was the sort of story he was telling,
mm-hmm,
and that's pretty much what Keynes more or less said too.
mm,
And then I remember thinking that, I was thinking, I wanted to talk to Alan. I said, recessions must be kind of weirdly popular in some circles because even though employment goes down, real wages are going to go up in recessions
mm,
because what prices are going to go down and wages are sticky. And so the people who stay employed are going to have higher real wages. So, it seems like it's a mixed blessing for people. And he said,
mm,
oh, I know that's what the story says. But really, the real wage is not countercyclical. It's really pretty much acyclical, maybe slightly procyclical. So he was basically telling the story where the countercyclical real wage was a key part of the mechanism,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't true of the data. And that really bothered the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about how we can sort of fix the story. That was sort of a lot of the motivation for the thesis.
Huh.
I don't think we made a lot of progress in the thesis, but it made me start thinking about goods markets. About maybe stickiness is not only about sticky wages, maybe it's also about sticky prices. And in terms of, if you think about sticky prices, you can't think about firms being price setters. You have to think about firms. I mean, you can't think about being price takers. They have to be price setters. So the idea of a competitive goods market doesn't work if you start thinking of sticky prices. And that
Yeah.
and that was part, and that was sort of in the thesis. But really, that was sort of what led me to what I think was my first sort of big hit, which is the menu cost paper. I wrote this
Yeah.
paper in grad school called Small Menu Costs and Large Business Cycles. But it was really
Hmm.
trying to answer questions that I had started thinking about back as an undergraduate.
Hmm.
How do I think about price setting, not just wage setting in the Keynesian model?
What did your advisors, what did Fisher think about those ideas when you were bringing him to him?
He was very supportive.
Yeah.
He was very supportive. Stan was one of the early New Keynesians. If you think back to his paper on long-term contracts and monetary policy,
Huh.
published in, I think, the late 70s in the JPE. That was basically one of the first New Keynesian papers. And by New Keynesian, I mean the group of researchers who were trying to respond to the new classical critique of Lucas and Sargent and Prescott and Barrow. So,
Mm.
so Stan, Stan's, I mean, there were some people at MIT like Solo who thought this whole new classical stuff was crazy and just want to ignore it. But Stan
Mm.
was of a very different view. His view was the Lucas and Sargent and Prescott and those folks need to be taken seriously, but he didn't actually agree with a lot of their conclusions. So,
Mm.
his own work was trying to say, okay, how can we sort of make sense of sort of Keynesian economics in a world where we take the Lucas critique and other critiques of Keynesian economics seriously? And that was, in some sense, the path I was going down. So he was really very supportive of that.
How come you weren't compelled by these classical, these, these criticisms of Prescott and others? What was it that you found that you were like, there's like a little bit of you that's just like, no, that's not where I'm going to go. Or I think
Well, I'm more
that's wrong.
sympathetic. I'm more sympathetic to the Lucas stuff than to the Prescott stuff because Lucas was sort of Lucas. I think the Lucas critique is a very compelling critique of existing models. Although I think sometimes his rhetoric took it too far, in the sense
Mm.
he wanted to sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think when he was critiquing these models, but Prescott basically wanted to push us all the way towards real business cycle theory, where was the business cycle was driven by technology shocks, money was completely neutral,
Mm.
and and that just seemed implausible to me that we have this institution called the Federal Reserve that thinks they have a tremendous power over the economy. Friedman and Schwartz told me they have tremendous power over the economy, and all of a sudden we think the money's neutral. That's just struck me as a little nutty. Uh,
Mm.
and so I never found the real business cycle stuff seriously. And it's clear
Yeah.
that the new classical stuff started off less radical, then became more radical as Prescott started pushing real business cycle theory.
I don't even understand, Greg, how in the world you're finishing MIT in 2 years, even if you're staggering it like that. I can't even wrap my head around that. How are you even doing the
Well,
classes?
well, a few things. First of all, I'd taken a bunch of grad courses at Princeton. So I
Yeah.
had basically finished a first year graduate sequence by the time I arrived at MIT. And there were exams, so I placed out of the first year sequence. And
Mm.
then when I was working at the Council of Economic Advisors, I was basically working for Larry Summers. And so when I had downtime, I was working on papers. And so
Oh,
when I came back, I already had some dissertation chapters written. So I came back and I just finished up a few courses that I needed to finish up and sort of put
yeah.
together a bunch of papers I'd written as a dissertation. And so I ended up completing it in only 2 years in residence. So I was on an NSF fellowship. I had a 3-year fellowship, and I gave back the third year to the NSF
Mm.
because I really didn't need it. In hindsight, it might have been smarter just to stick around for another year just to enjoy the environment of MIT, which is great. But for some reason, I was eager to get back to law school. Um,
Oh,
so I finished in, so what I said, it's 4 years of elapsed time, but only 2 years in residence at MIT.
So, okay, you actually get the PhD before you go back to that Harvard Law School
Yes, yes,
experience. So
yes.
you finish in 84 because I saw on your Vita you stay at MIT as an instructor for a
I
year. Is that what that was
Well,
about?
it's actually only a semester. What happens is like after 80 spring of 84, I got my PhD.
Uh-huh.
Fall of 84, I go back to law school. In the middle, in January, I say, "Oh, I'm not having fun at law school, so I think I'm going to go in the job market." And Stan says, "Well, why in the job market? Do you want to teach some courses here for us?" And so they hired me for the second semester as an instructor
Mhm.
at MIT. So I was teaching as an instructor that one semester, and then they got me the job uh, at Harvard. And then
Yeah.
so
It's incredible. I know that it's awkward to say this because you probably are modest, but you get you go from assistant professor to full in like it looks like 2 years. Had
yes.
that been done before?
Well, I can't. I think there have been other cases. What happened was I joined the Harvard faculty in the fall of 85, and in the middle of my second year there, just 86, 87, I get a call from Stan saying we'd like to offer you to come back to MIT on the faculty. And Stan
Mhm.
had a long, not Stan, MIT had a long tradition of hiring back their own students and then giving them tenure a few years later. So it wasn't a tenured offer, but it seemed like a very high probability of tenure, whereas the job at Harvard was much less certain. And MIT was a great department then, so I felt like this was a great honor. So I remember at that point I went to Larry Summers, who was still quite close to who was on the Harvard faculty at that point, and I
Oh,
said,
he left MIT. Well, after the CEA, he went to Harvard.
"That's right, that's right."
Oh, okay.
So I'd taken courses from him at MIT, but then he had gone. He was an assistant professor then, and then he got a tenure offer at Harvard, and he joined the Harvard faculty. And so he
Yeah.
was so when I was hired by the Harvard faculty, Larry was there, and he was I think important in getting me hired. And then I went to Larry saying, I really enjoyed my year and a half here, but I got this great offer at MIT, and I'm probably going to take it. And he said, "Is there anything we can do to get you to stay?" And he said, "I don't really think so. I think this is just a great offer. I don't think there's anything that Harvard can do." And then Larry said, "Well, what if we give you tenure right now?" And so
Mm-hmm.
he basically convinced the department to offer me tenure my second year as an assistant professor, which is quite unusual. I don't know. I don't know if it's unprecedented. I'm guessing there's other people who have done it too. But so I was voted tenure on my 29th birthday.
Yeah. What are they seeing in you? I don't mean it. I just mean, what do they? You've got all these people fighting over you. They're all these young macroeconomists and also very impactful senior people. When they're looking at you, what are they seeing? They must see a huge upside that's
Well, I think I don't want to make too much about me. I think I was partly in the right place at the right time. Harvard,
uh-huh.
Harvard at that point was clearly second banana to MIT. MIT was the stronger department.
Mm,
They had lost some uh, uh, good people, like Olivier Blanchard had been at at Harvard and then went to MIT.
mm,
I don't know if everyone thought that was a mistake. Certainly Larry Summers at the time thought that was a big mistake that Harvard didn't do more to keep him.
mm,
Um, they tried at that point. They tried to make an offer to Tom Sargent to come join the Harvard faculty. He turned them down. And so they knew they were in need of macroeconomists, and so promoting me was, I think, a way of sort of strengthening an area they felt they needed personnel, way of competing against their biggest rival down the river, really at MIT. And
uh-huh.
at the same time, roughly the same time, they hired Robert Barrow, I think, and I
Mm,
can't remember the exact timing, but it was the same time they promoted me. They recruited Robert.
mm,
So Robert and I were sort of shoring up the macro group. Uh,
mm. It was not as strong before you and
I think what had happened was they'd been trying to hire, and it hadn't been successful. Otto Eckstein had died just before I arrived.
mm,
And so I think they just needed, I think they needed macro personnel. And so I
I
think
see.
being at the right place at the right time was what sort of moved me along the career ladder a little faster.
Yeah.
I would have. Now after Harvard made it a tenured offer. MIT upped to the same. MIT then voted me to tenure. They upped their offer to basically match Harvard. And that was actually one of the most difficult decisions um, that I faced, is deciding to Harvard and MIT. These are such great departments, and I'm sure I would have been happy either one.
Yeah, I bet. I bet that must have been such an honor too. I mean, I just keep thinking about the fact that you're a first generation college student and then you're getting fought over by the two, most most important, two of the most important programs in the history of the profession. It must have just been, what was that? What did that feel like?
It was an honor. I mean, it was an honor.
Yeah.
Um, I felt very fortunate.
Yeah. Um, uh, so there's this great quote by Dizzy Gillespie, or I think it's Dizzy Gillespie. It might be Coltrane, but I think it's Gillespie. He says, there was apparently a journalist that had asked him, why did he and others set out to create bebop? And he said, we didn't set out to make bebop. We were just making music. And a lot of things kind of are like that in hindsight, I think. And so you get labeled this new Keynesian, and that seems like a hindsight label. But I'm curious, was it at the time, did you get any sense that there was a lot of originality or something that was going to form into a coherent kind of macro framework at the time as you were young?
No, not at all. I mean, I know some people have long-term research plans, like they can tell you what they're planning to do for the next 20 years. I just write to one paper at a time. And so
Really?
yeah, so I never have a long-term plan. I always have like, oh, I have an idea for a paper. Let me write that.
Yeah.
And but of course, in hindsight, they're going to cohere, because when you write one paper, then that'll start making you think about a topic or thinking along particular ways, and then you get another paper that's kind of related. And so in hindsight, you can say, aha, I see the pattern. But no, at the time, I didn't see that.
Well, so when is it, I've written a book I kind of look up to you, I mean, as having written a textbook. And, a lot of the people, some of the people I have on the podcast, I invite them because they're like the pantheon of textbook writers, like Bill Green was on here. So I was curious, it's the macro book, right? It's the intermediate macro book that's the first book.
Absolutely. What happened was, after I'd gotten tenure at Harvard, I knew there was, since they have a small macro faculty, they needed me to teach basic macro. And so I avoided the very big classes when my first 2 years as an assistant professor. I didn't really want to teach multiple hundred classes
Yeah.
at the beginning of my career. But once I got tenure, I knew that they were going to have me teach intermediate macro, because I was the natural person. It has to be taught every year.
You had a
And
good reputation as a teacher?
I think so. I think
Mm.
so. Um, but in any event, even if I hadn't, I think they needed somebody to teach intermediate macro. And most of my colleagues.
Right.
The sad truth about Harvard is we don't promote people based on what's fantastic teaching abilities.
Yeah.
We hope we try to appoint great scholars who have passable teaching abilities.
Right.
And I was certainly above the low bar that they used. So they had me teach intermediate macro, and for this, I start the year after I think right after I got tenure, I had a sabbatical, and then I came back. And as soon as I came back to teaching after that, started teaching intermediate macro. And at that point, I knew I was going to do it for a while.
Mm.
And in fact, I did do it for about 15 years after that.
That was what year? What year is that?
I'm guessing started in 88, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm guessing. I can't exactly pinpoint it at this point. I'm guessing 88.
Yeah. What textbook were you using? Were you using a textbook?
Well, I knew in advance that I was going to teach this course. So I started writing my textbook in anticipation of teaching the course. And so I was using Dornbush and Fisher and draft chapters from my manuscript. So I passed that to the students.
Was that normal to do something like that?
What do you hand
No,
out?
like to get assigned to class and say, I'm going to write a textbook,
No, oh
or
no.
like I'm going to.
No, I know. I thought no, no, it's not normal. I actually thought it was going to be easier than it turned out to be. I thought to
Mm.
myself, oh, if I'm going to teach this course and prepare detailed lecture notes, how much more work can it be to write a textbook? Is what I thought. Truth is, it's a
Why do
lot
you want to
more.
write a textbook? But why are you wanting to write a textbook?
Well, I wanted to organize the material a little differently than other people had.
Mm.
Um, in particular, I wanted to sort of start off with sort of long-run classical models, sort of like solo growth model, and think about price flexibility and the quantity theory money. So thinking about classical topics before diving into Keynesian topics, whereas most of the books then sort of start off with Keynesian economics. And I remember thinking I only really understood Keynesian economics until I understood before until I realized there's a baseline of classical economics, and this was
Yeah.
deviating from classical economics and a way of imposing wage and price rigidities.
Mm,
So
that was not done. That the people were just diving directly into that Keynesian model at that point.
exactly.
Oh,
So
okay.
so I wanted to organize it differently, and so I thought so I thought, well, why don't I write the textbook to go with it? Now, as I said, it turned out to be more work than I expected, but it turned out I liked doing it. I enjoyed it,
Hmm.
and then when the book came out, it seemed to be well received by the market, so people started
Hmm.
adopting it. So that was a good sign.
What was it? What year is that when the first edition
I
comes
think
out?
it came out in 91. I maybe have these things off by a little bit. I think it was 91.
Huh.
Or
So you
maybe
over,
maybe
so it's
maybe
an
early maybe early
intermediate,
maybe early 92.
intermediate macro,
Yes.
intermediate macro. And remind me again the publisher, because it's with the
That
P,
was
right?
that was that was called Worth Publishers. They've now been subsumed by Macmillan.
Oh, okay,
So now
okay.
this Worth was eventually sold to a much bigger company, Macmillan, and so now I think it's still under Worth imprint, but it's a subsidiary of Macmillan Learning.
But it's not, Greg, like you said, oh, there's definitely a hole in the market and I want to fill that hole. It wasn't like you were thinking of it as like
Well,
fixing.
no, I wasn't thinking as a whole exactly. I was just thinking I want a book that's organized differently,
Yeah.
and so I'll write. I'll write the book I want the way I want to do it. And as I say, I used the Dornbush Fisher book along with manuscript chapters for maybe 1 or 2 years. Then
Mm.
there were enough manuscript chapters. I just used that for a
So
couple of
your
years.
dissertation actually has this comprehensive feel if you're able to pull out pieces of your dissertation for
No, it
structure.
wasn't parts. It wasn't pieces of my dissertation. It was pieces
Oh,
of a manuscript for the textbook. So I started
oh,
writing the book before I was teaching the course.
oh, I see. Okay.
So I had manuscript ready for the course once I started teaching. I didn't have the whole book, but I had enough that I could pass out chapters.
Did you feel like, it's funny because in your principles book, you're able to kind of distill, you have this like classic distillation in the first chapter of like 10, this list of 10 things. And so I was thinking as I was prepping, I was like, I wonder if Greg thinks in terms of if he's able just to categorize really well and like see this like table of contents kind of person. Because some people might just be overwhelmed by the details that they can't even pull back to see the big picture. But it seems like you're able to see the big picture, see the small details, and like also have this like table of contents kind of brain. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I start with the table of contents.
You did. You
Absolutely.
started with
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So, and my editor, I have a wonderful editor named Jane Tufts. My editor tells me that a lot of authors she gets write too long at the beginning, and she has to pare things down.
Oh.
I have the opposite. I tend to start off fairly Spartan. So I start with the table of contents, and then I start filling in the table of contents with words. And she says the first draft is usually too quick, not detailed enough. And she asked me for more explanation, and so we build up rather than taking something very long and cut down.
Mm.
That's the way I've always written. I don't exactly know why, but it seems to have worked. It seems to have worked for me.
Hmm. So, what your colleagues think? Are they, given you said Harvard Mac is like their objective function is, you know, maximize research impact and if they're good in the classroom or whatever, that's fine. But I could imagine that the textbook part you might have had people that are like, that's a big waste of time.
Oh,
Or
sure. I remember I'd written when I was starting to writing the principles textbook. We haven't got to there yet, but when I remember when I started writing my second textbook, the one that's actually the bigger seller, and we were talking to Stan Fisher, and he advised me not to do it because he thought it would take too much time away from research. And it has. I mean, there's no doubt that there's an opportunity cost. One of the things about academia, though, is once you get tenure, you don't really have to worry what your colleagues think. You basically do what you would.
Right.
And so I've taken advantage of that. I mean, I think I've been reasonably productive in research as well. But
Totally.
There's no question I probably would have written more papers, but for the fact I've written textbooks.
Yeah. So when do you start this principles project?
Well, I remember very explicitly when that project. I hadn't been thinking about that project myself, but the intermediate book came out and it started selling well, and then publishers started approaching
Pretty
me
much instantly, Greg. You could tell it's in. You could
a
tell
few
it's
years.
adoption pretty much fast.
Yeah, I think it was selling well. It took a while before it became the #1 book for that market, but I think people could tell that it was going to be a success. And so publishers then started approaching me to write the principles book, and that was an attractive thing for a couple of reasons. One is sort of financial; they just offered me a boatload of money, and I thought I'd come from a family with money. I was probably more money conscious than some of my colleagues.
Right.
And partly you can reach so many people that way. There's
Yeah.
a million people a year taking principles of economics or so, maybe a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're an economist and want to reach a large audience, that's the place to do it.
Yep.
And so that was very intriguing for me. And I know I signed, I can tell you exactly when that was. I signed the contract to do that at the very end of 1992. And the reason I know that so precisely
for principles in 92.
Yeah. Signed the contract at the end of, I had basically written nothing. I had a vague outline.
Is it principles of macro? It's going to be principles of macro?
It's principles of economics. It's both micro and macro.
Oh, it's the big one.
Yeah, it's the big
one.
That's what you do. You write the big book, and then they split it up into splits for the micro and macro. You're writing the whole book, which is a full year course, micro, macro, 800 pages long.
Is that what the book publishers are even still wanting? They want the big combo book?
Yes. I think they market, most people who do this will write the whole field, micro and macro, and then they'll have these splits, different versions of subsets.
I see. Okay.
So there's really only one book. It's the Principles of Economics, but it actually comes out in 5 different versions with different groups of chapters.
Oh, I did know that part. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so that I signed that contract at the end of 1992, and the reason I know that so well is Bill Clinton had just gotten elected, and he had promised that he was going to raise taxes. And I said, okay, I want to get the advance before Bill Clinton gets in and raises taxes. So I signed that like the last week of 1992 and got the advance.
Now who is the dominant book at that moment in principles?
Well,
are you teaching Ec 1? Is it Ec 101 or Ec 1? What's it called?
Harvard? At Harvard, it's called Ec 10.
Ec 10. Are you teaching that when you started?
I did. I recently passed the baton.
No, I mean when you started in 92.
When I started in 92. No, I was teaching intermediate macro at that point, but I had actually done a small section. I hadn't run the course, but I had been a section leader under Marty Feldstein when I first started at Harvard. So I had 1 year of experience teaching the course. And so I knew how Marty approached the material, which was very useful for me because Marty, by the way, was also Harvey Rosen's dissertation advisor. So I was a second generation Feldstein student through Harvey, and then I taught under Marty. And so my book really very much reflected his vision of economics too, I think.
Yeah.
And as soon as it came out, Marty, when the principles book came out, Marty was one of the first people to adopt it because he was running the principles course at that point.
Yeah.
So I started writing this in 1993. Actually, I think I signed the contract in 92. It was probably a few months before I started.
Yeah.
in 93, and then it probably came out in, I'm guessing 96, 97. I don't remember exactly the year.
Mm. It
Um,
took you about 3 years, or no, it came out in 96, but you
yeah.
probably turned the manuscript in like 95 or 94 or something.
Yeah, probably 95. So it probably took 2.5 years to write it or something, maybe 3 years.
Wow. So now, how do you get how quickly is it when it comes out where you start to when you begin to realize that this book is making real moves through the profession in terms of adoption? What are you
Well,
noticing?
well, I think the first really big sign was when the Economist magazine wrote an article that was
Oh,
basically
really?
a review. You can find that on the old Economist. They basically they had a whole issue talking about economics education, but they
Huh.
had a one-page review of my book that was very complimentary,
Oh,
and I thought
that's
it was
got to
great.
not be common. That is that
No,
was
it
that?
isn't. No, exactly. They don't usually review textbooks. It's quite unusual.
Huh.
Well, what had happened. What as I was writing the book, were details leaked from the publishing profession about the details of my contract. I didn't really want to talk about the details of my contract. But the New York Times got wind of it from one of the competing publishers that I didn't sign with. And
Oh.
so, and so they got the details of the contract and they wrote an article as I was writing it about my writing that what publishers were hoping would be the next Samuelson.
Oh,
Uh,
that was the framing of it.
That was
That's
the
what made.
framing. Yes, you can find the
Oh,
old New
that's
York
the
Times
next
article.
book.
That was the framing. A publisher's looking for the next Samuelson, and maybe this guys can do it. And they had the details of the contract in the New York Times article. So this was the front page of I think it was the Sunday business section. I mean, it was one of the front page of the business section. I can't remember what the Sunday. I think so, but it was front page of the business section with a big picture of me. Um, and uh, and so because this signing had gotten some publicity, when it came out, people were really looking for it, saying, okay, this guy worth all that money they paid him to do this? And so I think because of that, The Economist was more interested than they are when yet another textbook comes out. Um,
Oh,
so it was funny.
wow.
I was not happy with the New York Times article.
Because they leaked because
Yeah,
they had
because of
all
my personal
the contract.
finances, it didn't seem
Yeah.
like it was anybody's business what my personal finances were. But it turned out it was as a marketing ploy, it made a lot of sense. I mean,
Why? Because it's sort of because they're obviously putting a big valuation on the book, so it's sort of signaling to a lot of people that it's going to be really big or it's really
exactly,
valuable.
exactly,
Oh,
exactly. So at least it got people to look at the book. I mean,
yeah.
the hardest thing with a new book is just to get people to look at it because people are usually reasonably satisfied with what they have. So there's a
Yep.
switching cost. Publisher comes in and say, "Oh, we want to see our new book." They say, "No, I'm fine."
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
one, oh yeah, I've heard about that one. Really? He got that much money? Let me see. Let me see. Let me see what this book looks like.
Were they giving them out to instructors
Oh
back?
yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
Yeah.
always been a policy
Yes.
to give them
Yes.
out.
Yes. Yes. Complimentary copies are yes, our policy.
That goes back a long way.
Yes.
So when did Samuelson's book stop? When does it start to decline in terms of its own use?
Well, I mean, before I arrived on the scene, I mean, sometimes people portrayed I killed Samuelson, but no, but Samuelson had already faded. I'm guessing the early 90s, late 80s, maybe. I mean,
Hmm.
he at some point passed the baton onto Bill Nordhaus. And so he wasn't doing the
Oh.
revisions anymore. Bill Nordhaus was. Now, Bill Nordhaus is a great economist, but for whatever reason, he didn't keep the Samuelson book going. And so
Hmm.
it started fading. Um, and
Is it like an aging out? Like because you could imagine that a professor just doesn't want to doesn't want to build new overhead transparencies or whatever because it's so they're like I'm just going to keep using it, but the new professor doesn't have any. So is it that you're switching people or
you
is
know,
it that
it's both. I mean, it's both. There's an old expression that Samuelson used to quote, but although I don't think it's original to Samuelson, he used to say, "Science progresses funeral by funeral."
yeah, right.
But uh, so
Textbook
that's part of,
adoptions also.
yeah, yeah. But I don't think just that. I think that people were really switching.
They were
And
switching.
I think yes, yes. Trying to get people switching, I think, is a big part of the marketing plan because people don't retire fast enough. Uh,
Right.
and so that was, and I helped that there wasn't a dominant book at the time. I mean, that Samuelson had faded.
Mm,
There were several books out there that were quite good. I mean, I think my Balmo Blinder, was one of those big sellers at that time. I
yeah.
think Parkin had a book that was selling well at the time. There was a very old book by a guy named Campbell McConnell who's still selling well to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, that Campbell McConnell has passed away quite a few years ago, but he's been taken over by other people. So it's came McConnell Brew and then McConnell Brew and Flynn. So that book somehow managed to survive the transition to new authors, whereas the Samuelson
Mm,
book didn't. And
mm,
I don't read the other books enough to really have a sense as to why that is, but
yeah.
that's where we are now.
I can imagine, well, I don't want to put words on you, but I bet the book been a really not just, in terms of it's like reaching a lot of people, but you must feel a certain affection.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's clear I've influenced more people in my life through that book than in any other way.
Yeah.
So I was doing some historical archival research trying to figure out how many copies have I sold. So I looked back for old reports, and I think I'm basically at 5 million copies for the English language version. And
A
who knows?
total of the principles book,
Yes. Well,
5 million,
of all the books together. I mean,
all the
just
books
of
together,
all five
five
different versions.
million.
Yeah, I think about of all the versions put together, I think about 5 million in the English version, and then there's a bunch of translations, and I don't get very good data on that. But there's
Mm,
20 translations, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar number in translation. So the book,
that's
so the books really reached large numbers of people, and that's no. So I have a lot of affection for that book for
yeah,
that reason, because I feel like this is my contribution to the world.
yeah.
Um, and I get
No.
I run into people all the time who've read it as students, and
Mhm.
and not infrequently I get an email from someone who says, I read your book and that's what made me decide to become an economist.
Yeah,
Much of the same way that I read Lipstein Steiner back when I was
yeah.
a freshman.
Well, you know what's funny? As I was kind of thinking about the prepping today, I was thinking about that you've taught so many students, but actually too, you've also taught so many teachers because it's not just that it's when you're a first or second year college student, it's all kind of a blur a little bit, but it's incredible because you gave all this infrastructure to so many college professors too. And so for a lot of people, I think that this is probably true. A lot of people probably feel indebted to you because you taught them how to be a college professor. I don't know if you've heard that probably before, but I would say that I would feel that way. I used the book when I taught principles also, and I felt like I was being taught how to teach economics in a disciplined way. And every time I taught it, I just fell in love more and more with the material. And it's something you don't always think about when you write the book, is that the book is as much for the teachers as it is for the students.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's right. I thank you very much for those kind words. No, I get a lot of emails from students and teachers who've used the book.
Hmm.
It's always very heartening. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes they have suggestions, and I listen to them carefully. And I think
Mm.
each edition of the book gets a little better than the previous edition. Uh,
Yeah.
Now I'm working right now on the 11th edition of the book, and
Mm.
I'm finding it harder to make huge improvements because I think after fine tuning it for 10 times before, I feel like the book's in pretty good shape. But of course,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the world changes and you have new things to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wonder how all this artificial intelligence is going to change people's interactions with these textbooks. I mean, you can plow through this difficult material using ChatGPT in a way that maybe not before. I wonder what it's going to be like this year when people are, because this is the first cohort that's probably going to come in, beginning to really use this generative AI stuff for these kinds of classes.
Well, I think the publishers are now thinking about how to incorporate that. I mean,
Yeah.
one development in the textbook market is that the textbook market has moved, especially for introductory courses, to digital books. So the vast majority of my sales are now digital sales.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not getting a physical product at all. You're just getting a subscription to a website that has the book. But that website also has other capabilities. So there could be, a little embedded videos to explain concepts verbally. There's
Yep.
self-tests. There are homework assignments that can be automatically graded and registered in the professor's grade book. At some point, that digital product will include some sort of AI.
Yeah.
We haven't figured that out yet.
Mankiw GPT. That's what they need. A Mankiw GPT chatbot that helps tutor them on every quest all
Yeah,
throughout.
exactly. I mean, I think right now the AI is too prone to make stuff up.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they'll fix that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a solvable problem.
Yeah.
And I think there's some AI that's better than others. I'm particularly a fan of Perplexity. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Oh, yeah.
I think that to me seems much more reliable than ChatGPT in my experience.
I like ChatGPT 4 and Claude 3.5. They both, if you have to work them a little bit. You have to kind of crack the whip on them to get them to talk right. But you can usually, if you keep trying, get there. They're good. They're deep on some stuff and completely wrong on other stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, to be honest, I haven't tested it. But I wouldn't be surprised if all 12 editions of your book are right there in the training data for
I wouldn't be
for
surprised.
for all of them. I have this quote I'm going to kind of end with this. I was wanting to get your opinion about this quote. This was written by William Shockley, who ran Bell Labs, won the Nobel Prize in physics he wrote it. I think he either wrote it in 57 or 56, and it's about the high productivity of scientists. He's really interested in these like far right tail kind of citation people, which you are with about 120,000 sites. And he wants to kind of understand, what puts them at the tail. And he's got this really interesting quote because after I read this quote, he's going to write down a Cobb Douglas production function. He doesn't call it that, but this is what he has. He calls it that these citations follow a log normal distribution. So he says, still another way of rationalizing the log normal distribution may be based on the hypothesis that the interacting mental factors are of several different kinds rather than one kind, as in the case of several ideas discussed above. So he's basically going to describe the inputs in this production function. He says, consider the factors that may be involved in publishing a paper. And he says, a partial listing could be, and he's going to say 8 things: ability to think of a good problem, ability to work on it, ability to recognize a worthwhile result, ability to make a decision as to when to stop and write up the results, ability to write adequately, ability to profit constructively from criticism, determination to submit the paper to a journal, persistence in making changes. And then the production function is really interesting because it's each of those inputs multiplied by each other. So if you have, obviously, with these production functions, you have to have non-zero amounts, but it's interesting to frame it that way because, first of all, none of those things are intelligence. When he listed them, he didn't list intelligence. That might be, the technology of the production function, but he doesn't list them. And he says that they multiply together, which means that you could have 7 of those things. And if you don't have the 8th, you don't make a paper. And so I was kind of curious, first of all, when you hear me write that, when you hear me read that, I'm curious, does that resonate at all with you when you think back over your own, career as a researcher and a career even in all these areas as an economist? What do you think when I tell you that? That's my first question about your own production function.
No, I think that production function makes a lot of sense actually, and yeah, you sometimes see people struggle in the research process either because they can't think of a good question, or somebody at the end who feels too uncertain about their own output to submit it to a journal. So you can see a lot of stumbling blocks. Uh, as economics has gotten more and more technical, one of my stumbling blocks has been, I'm not quite as high tech as some of the younger economists. And so what I've done is often co-author papers with people who are more technically astute than I am. So one of my most cited papers is with Ricardo Rice, who's now a professor at London School of Economics. We wrote this together when he was a grad student. And it's very clear that, at that point in his career, when I met Ricardo, he didn't have all the skills he has now. He's a fantastically successful research economist now. At the time then, he was sort of lacking some, but he had very great technical skills. And so I think we wrote that paper together where he basically contributed disproportionate amount of the technical skills, and I probably had a little more wisdom and the other attributes that part of that production function. So I think putting together the right team is important, and that's why it's very lucky for somebody like me to be at a place like Harvard, where you get students who are just fantastic. And so when I'm looking for a student that I want to work with, it's very easy to find somebody whose talents are just tremendous.
Yeah, so it might not be the individual production function as much as the Adam Smith pen factory where you find your team and specialize in your comparative advantage.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been fun. This is I've wanted to just tell you that what I said, which is I really appreciate you helping me become a professor. I love economics, and your book only made me love it more.
Well, thank you, Scott.
And I really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we run into each other sometime soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.